This is a production of O'Brien Communications.
Hi, I'm Tim O'Brien, and this is the Shaping Opinion podcast. Our guest today is Carole Lieberman. She's an accomplished psychiatrist and a forensic expert witness. She's board certified in both psychiatry and neurology. She's been a leading voice on the psychology of terrorism and its impact on people. Today, we'll be talking to Carole about psychological warfare and how she thinks it may be used to divide Americans. We'll also talk with Carole about what she describes as the emotional collapse of American leadership. Hi, Carole. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question. I read a lot about your background before this interview, and there's a lot that people would know about you if they follow you. You've been on TV, you've been in a lot of interviews over the years in some very high-profile situations. What would people be surprised to learn about you?
Well, in a professional sense, they might be surprised to know that I stopped the Schwarzenegger rocket. Do you remember the Schwarzenegger rocket? That was in 1993.
I vaguely remember that. I was around then, but I vaguely remember that. What happened there?
The NASA was going to send up a rocket that for the first time was going to have private money involved in it, because different industries wanted to put things on the rocket, like to do experiments. So they were willing to contribute. And they also sold ad space on the outside of the rocket. And Columbia and Sony bought the ad space. I think they had an auction, and they paid the highest price. And they wanted to advertise Arnold Schwarzenegger's upcoming movie, The Last Action Hero. And I had been very much campaigning for years. I still do to some degree, but now I'm more, now I've replaced that with terrorism. But anyhow, so they bought the ad space, and they were going to have this add-on for a violent movie. I mean, I was the head of the National Coalition on TV Violence for years, and testified before Congress and all that. And I had protested outside Schwarzenegger's movies in the past. I mean, he was one of my key violent, perpetrators of violence. So when I read in the LA Times that there was going to be this rocket with his ad, I couldn't believe it, really, that they would put an ad on a rocket that was already tacky, but that they would have it be for a violent movie. You know, we're going up into space and we're telling whoever is out there, right, that we're violent, that this is what we like. So I started a campaign that went on for about 4 months, trying to get people to contact NASA and contact the president and contact Schwarzenegger's publicist and Columbia, and to protest. And sure enough, eventually it worked, because I said that I was going to tie myself to the rocket if they sent it off. Not that I think that was the final thing. The final thing actually was that all these companies, the rocket had gotten such bad publicity, from me, that these companies didn't want to be on it anymore. They pulled out. So that was the end of the rocket. I wasn't trying to end the rocket. I was just trying to end Schwarzenegger's ad. But that's one of the things that I'm really proud of that I accomplished. On the personal side, what they'd be surprised to know is that I am a competitive horseback rider. I compete in riding competitions, particularly 3-day eventing, which is dressage, cross-country jumping, and stadium jumping.
That's pretty diverse what you're doing. From the Schwarzenegger rocket to your equestrian pursuits. But the reason I found you, actually I didn't find you. One of your people reached out to us, but when I read their description, I thought, wow, this is really a good fit for us, because there were two topics. Her name's Kristen. The two topics that Kristen sent my way that I thought I'd really like to get Carole's thoughts on these things. And, one of them is psychological warfare. I've talked about that before on this podcast with someone that wrote a book, but not someone that came at it from your perspective. And I think it's important when I say your perspective to talk about that first. And that is, since 9/11, it's a little over 23 years now. It'll be 23 years in September. There's been, a lot going on in the culture. There was a terrorist attack, but the culture also changed.
24 years in September.
Or 24, yeah, 24 years in September.
2001.
And on this podcast, I've done 11 episodes on 9/11.
Oh, wow.
And they were all with people who had a first-person story from that day. So you might remember that photograph of the firefighters.
Yes.
I talked to that photographer, and I talked to people that were I talked to the FBI agent that was at Somerset, and I talked to some one police officer who was on the ground on 9/11, and a few other people. And Aaron Brown, you might remember him from CNN. We did an interview on his perspective covering 9/11 that day. It was always a very important topic for this podcast. And I saw that you were sort of triggered by 9/11 to start taking pretty much a stand on terrorism and its impact on people. So could you describe how that sort of became your life's work when 9/11 happened?
Sure. From Schwarzenegger to terrorists. Not too much of a leap. I'm only kidding, sort of. How that happened was when 9/11, I'm a born and bred New Yorker. And when 9/11 happened, I had already moved to California. My daughter was in school there, though, at the time. And my heart is still in New York, really. And so it personally affected me, when they attacked the Twin Towers. And I just had this, I don't know, kind of an epiphany or just some kind of a sense that, and I had never really paid attention to terrorism before 9/11. I mean, it was like sports and terrorism were two things that I didn't have to pay attention to in the news, like reading a newspaper. I had to narrow it down. I couldn't do everything. And, but that just, got me into it. And I had this feeling that terrorism was going to be the most important, most dangerous thing in our lifetime. And I decided that I would quickly learn about terrorism and try to help people with it. And so what I did, I went to a number of conferences, and I have spoke to people who were the top leaders at the time, and I got a quick knowledge in terrorism, and of course I've been following it ever since. And I started helping people. The first thing I did was to make an audio and a video tape for airlines to put in their in-flight entertainment, because as you will remember, people were very afraid to fly at that time because they used planes to attack the Pentagon and the Twin Towers, and then there was the third plane that the people on the plane got to land in a Pennsylvania field rather than the White House or wherever, or the Capitol, wherever it was planning to go. And so I made this audio video program that helped people to relax on planes. It had like a beginning and a middle and an end. Like the beginning was to get them sort of to be able to relax into listening to it. The middle was the intense part of it, and then the end was to get them ready to disembark and deal with whatever they were flying to. So that got to be pretty popular on domestic and international airlines. And then what? And then I was helping people individually. And then I was doing a lot of media talking about it. And I was doing And then my first book came in 2005 when a London publisher had me, engaged me to write a book. I had wanted to write the book, and a London publisher wanted it too, and it was for the 1-year anniversary of London's 9/11, which was 7/7 of 2005, and so it came out on 7/7/2006, and that was Coping with Terrorism: Dreams Interrupted. And I looked at how terrorism affected people. I had a quiz at the beginning. Do you have terrorist stress syndrome? And then I looked at everything. I looked at children. I looked at teenagers. I looked at terrorism, how that affects your work, how it affects your love life, like everything. But that was pretty much, it's available online for anybody, but it was pretty much concentrated in the UK. Anyhow, I particularly used examples. I interviewed people who had lost people in their 9/11 and 7/7, and talked about things. I had quotes from Shakespeare. It was very, very British oriented. And then what? And then I was still doing, helping individuals, and I was helping doing media and talking about it. And then in 4 years ago or 5 years ago now, I made, for the anniversary of 9/11, I created a music video because, it really has bothered me over the years how people, as influenced by some of the presidents since then, people have been encouraged to not pay attention to 9/11 anymore. Biden, for example, and so I wanted people to keep remembering 9/11. Of course, for the people who died and for the first responders and people who were still dying because they were working on the ground at 9/11 and where there was all that toxic material. So I created this music video, and I had it play on a mobile billboard, which is basically a truck that plays videos on the sides of it, the two main sides. And I sent that around New York City, Manhattan, and Washington, D.C. And I did that for 4 years, or maybe last year was the fourth. Anyway, every 9/11 anniversary. And so particularly in Manhattan, it went around and people were, it got a lot of attention. And it was primarily, at those years, it was primarily a warm and fuzzy kind of video. I have things like I had symptoms so people could see if 9/11 triggers some of these PTSD symptoms, for example. It was sort of a bunch of different things. And I did have where, history, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Mm-hmm. But last year, and I wasn't on these trucks for those years because that was during COVID. And so I wasn't on it. But last year was the first year that I actually was on the truck. And it was a great experience. And I liked talking to people and getting their comments and so on, what they thought about the different parts of it. Oh, wait a minute. Before that, 2017. So I think right before I did the mobile billboard, I wrote my second book about terrorism, and that's called Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror. And half of that book is for grown-ups, how to talk to kids, how to notice when kids are having symptoms that are related to hearing about terrorism, and different things you can do to get them to express their emotions, and so on and so forth. And the reason why I was sort of remembering that was before is because the book won a lot of awards. It won the British Book Festival Award and the French Paris Book Festival Award, and so I went to those places to get the award, and then I also spent time, giving talking at bookstores and just talking with people about terrorism, and so I remembered that was before when I was doing the videos. And then what? And so then in the last year, I did go in the truck and I changed the video. I kept some of it in, but I made it much more, not just warm and fuzzy, but why we should remember, blah, blah, blah. But how terrorists are in our streets and how we have to wake up, and that Israel is just the canary in the coal mine. Yes, they want to destroy Israel, and kill Jews, but they want to kill anybody who is a non-believer in Islam. And so, and this is when there were students at the colleges having the protests and so on. And so I made it much more kind of a warning.
What kind of reaction did you get from that?
Well, I wore a bulletproof vest last year.
Oh my!
Because I was a little concerned. No one did shoot at me. I was fine, but I was anticipating, something. I can't say that the people who came to the truck. I can't say that anyone was, trying to do anything to me or was super angry. But I think for those people who didn't agree with what I had in the video, I think they just didn't say anything. I
want to ask you a question about that. And this is something I've observed over the years. You have people like yourself, and it's also a business. I mean, you're selling books and doing things like that, but there are things that you will write or you will say that warrants, in your case, wearing a bulletproof vest. That's a risk that most people don't take when they write a book. And I want to ask you about that. It's like,
Sure.
Why would you do that? Why would you put your own health and safety at risk just to write a book or just to give speeches or take a position?
Well, I've written other books, so it's not just about a book, but the two books on terrorism obviously are more controversial. Although, to be honest, I did not expect, I wore a bulletproof vest because this is when all the things were, people were protests were happening and people were, took October 7th I didn't expect people to be even about terrorism. Like I didn't ride in the truck, but not because I was afraid the 3 years before. I did this podcast, the Terrorist Therapist Show. You mentioned it. And I really don't think that it should be controversial. It's controversial that terrorists who want to kill us should be controversial. It has kind of been shocking to me that there should be any question about, and kind of frustrating to me because I've been doing all this for years, and that there should be any question about how terrorists do want to kill us. They want to kill the West. Those who don't want, either you submit to them and you go along with Sharia law and all of that, and you become you believe in the Quran and all of that, or they want to kill you because Muhammad has said that, or so they think, that to get it's their job on earth to get rid of all the non-believers, not just the Jews, but the Catholics, the any other religion other than Islam. And
I have a question for you there, and this is it's another incident, but it goes to what you're talking about. But I really, I ask you this from the perspective of, as a public figure yourself, Salman Rushdie was giving a speech in Chautauqua, and he was attacked and pretty seriously hurt, almost killed. And I remember that pretty clearly, the coverage around that. What went through your mind when you saw what happened to him? Because he had I guess you could say, a bounty on him for many years.
Right.
And they finally, yeah. What were your thoughts when you saw that?
Well, I can't say that it doesn't sometimes make me, uh, think that if enough terrorists or one important terrorist kind of got like her. Oh, like I'll give you an example with my podcast, the Terrorist Therapist Show. It goes out. All podcasts go out all over the world. It's online, right? So it goes to a lot of other countries. In fact, there was when they have it so that you can see what countries the people are listening from. There have been some Middle East countries, and yes, do I think about, are they going to put out a fatwa on me? Sure, but but I feel very strongly about this. I feel very strongly about America. And I feel very strongly about people not being, people waking up to what is really at stake. You know that Europe, for example, has been taken over by these radical Islamist migrants. And I mean, England, God. And I lived in England for a while. I lived in Paris for years. And so these countries have, mean something to me, have personal meaning to me. Belgium also. And when I see what's happening, I just feel I can't believe it. I think Macron the other day. I mean, by now they're afraid to say anything like positive towards Israel. I mean, Netanyahu did a press conference the other day where he said the leaders of Europe tell me that they are for Israel. Of course, then they recognize. Macron, for example, recognized Palestine as a state, but he said they tell me that they really are on Israel's side, but they have to say these things because there are so many terrorists in their countries. So it's reached a tipping point in these countries, and where they're asking for caliphates to be built, like in Germany, for example, they asked for a caliphate, and it's kind of like, why are they not waking up to this? And I know, like in England has been especially has made really big changes in the past year, especially in terms of these terrorists getting more power. And where the British, if you say something against the terrorists, or I guess you're not supposed to call them terrorists to begin with, but if you say something against these migrants online, they're supposed they put you, that's a crime in England.
Well, it's interesting because that's a topic that we've started to cover here on this podcast. And we will continue to cover things like the Online Safety Act, they call them over there, the Digital Services Act in Europe. And so they are definitely policing speech online. It's not just restricted to these topics, but it includes these topics. And actually, that gets me into those two topics that I mentioned at the outset of our show today. And that is the first one, and it kind of goes, it's well beyond terrorism and Islam, and that is psychological warfare in general. This is something you know something about as a psychiatrist, and the issue there is, the question, I guess, is how it's being used right now to divide Americans. And I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, and I don't want to feed conspiracy theories that are baseless. But at the same time, I can think, and I'm not saying that this is warfare in the traditional sense, but the techniques of psychological warfare. I'm a public relations person. I started in the media, and I've been in PR for decades, and I do a lot of crisis and issues work. So it's the concepts and the theories and the strategies of psychological warfare I'm somewhat familiar with, but I draw the line. I mean, you have to be dishonest to engage in psychological warfare. You have to cross that line, because it beyond propaganda into head games, basically. So I wanted to start there, really, and ask you, first off, Do you think it is being used, psychological warfare? And if you do, how would you define it? How would you frame psychological warfare and how it's being used?
Psychological warfare is using mind games as weapons. And in America, it has been increasing. The use of psychological warfare has been increasing. For example, now you may not agree with me on this. I know this is kind of a far out example, but January 6th, Democrats have blown up what January 6th was and what it means for the country and what it means for Trump. They keep claiming that Trump set this up when in fact, I watched his speech that morning that they're trying to say is where he told them to go to the Capitol and do all kinds of bad things. He didn't do that. He told people to march over there, but they were supposed to be showing, just by standing in front of the Capitol, showing that they support, the idea of questioning, recounting the votes. But he did not tell. There was nothing that he said that morning. I saw the whole thing. Nothing that he said gave them permission or urged them to go to the Capitol and tear it apart. And some people did more in terms of more outrageous behavior than others. But we know that of course, it's come out since then that there have been movies that show the truth about January 6th, where they see that there were agents who were a part of it. We know that Nancy Pelosi said and told them in DC not to put extra police, not to guard it more. And we see in the movies that they made about January 6th, and we see the police opening the doors to let them in. I mean, not the police. That's different from what I was just saying about Nancy Pelosi. There was a call to have more protection in general in Washington, and she nixed that. But I'm talking about the police who were the normal police for the Capitol. We saw them opening the doors. The only person who got killed was Ashley Babbitt, and she was one of the people in the January 6th movement. She wasn't, and she didn't do anything wrong. She was just opening a door, opening a window, something. She was coming into another room, and she got shot by a policeman.
Are you saying that there were psychological warfare strategies that day?
That not by the January 6th people, but how January 6th was then used by Democrats to make it seem like Trump was causing an insurrection, because there is if you cause, there was something in an amendment, I can't remember now, I wrote something about it, but that if you are someone who causes an insurrection, that you can't be president. That's the bottom line. And so that's why they kept calling it an insurrection. And that's why at the anniversary of 9/11, of January 6th, they had this whole event, in Washington, and again, bringing it up. But we know now that the committee that was supposed to study January 6th found they didn't find things where they could blame Trump. They kept it going, though, with the whole committee and interviewing people, and they made it into a much bigger thing than it was. And
what's the difference between politics and psychological warfare? Because some people might listen to everything that you just said and just say, well, it is pretty ugly politics, but it's politics where, they're trying to smear Trump and Trump's trying to go after Pelosi. So you have Washington, D.C. politics. Obviously, people were put in jail. So this is not just politics. But my question for you, though, from a strategy point of view is, where's the line between politics and psychological war?
Well, I think the line is using something as a tool. It's one thing to express your disagreement with what happened on January 6th, and even to, even to call it an insurrection, or, I mean, at the time, you could have political opinions about what happened, but what I say the difference is, or where it goes into psychological warfare, is using it way past January 6th to be a battering ram against Trump. So that, first of all, so that nobody would look into the election, and so that if he ran down the line, that they could keep bringing this up and turning the public, making sure the public remembers January 6th.
It's interesting. When I started, actually, one of the founders of my field is a guy named Edward Bernays, and he wrote a book called Propaganda. And so in the public relations field, we don't like to use that word, and we don't like to do those necessarily all those things, but the roots are basically in public persuasion, mass persuasion. And you've had some people do some very bad things using these techniques over the decades since Edward Bernays was alive. He happened to be a nephew of Sigmund Freud, so it was all in the family there. There was a and so he fancied himself this social engineer, this societal engineer, this opinion engineer, and he found ways to do these things. And even things like to get people to smoke cigarettes and to sell cigarettes to women, and he did all these different things that were very groundbreaking in one sense and very notorious in another. And the reason I bring that up is because the word propaganda is in the field, and I've studied it. And as I've said already, there's an ethical public relations and there's an unethical public relations. There's an ethical communications, ethical marketing, and unethical. Ethical politics, unethical. Ethical judicial systems, and unethical. It goes throughout the whole society. I think what you're talking about when we talk about psychological warfare is that gray area. And it's a gray area because when it was invented, psychological warfare, and Edward Bernays had his hand in some of that too, I think. But when it was invented, you had the War Office, World War II. This is mostly a phenomenon of around World War II and after. You basically justified the unethical or shady things you were doing because you thought, well, this is a country that is our enemy or a potential threat to the United States. It wasn't just the United States, England and all these other Western countries. They all deployed these psychological warfare campaigns to change the globe, really, to change the geography of the globe, to win without firing shots, to undermine elections in other countries, to sabotage dictators and fascists. That was the origins of it. But once you get good at something like psychological warfare, you're tempted to use it over and over again in places where it may not necessarily be required or be ethical. And then sooner or later, and you'd have to be naive to think that the people that can do this don't do it even on our own shores, because that's a long way to get to where I wanted to go with this, and that is during COVID. I've done, like I said, I've done crisis communications work.
That's a good example, yes.
And here's the first thing. I'm not a public health expert. I don't know COVID from, tuberculosis as far as that goes. But I do know communication. And I remember my training was, if you ever have a problem, a public crisis, number one is to calm the public. Number one is to inform the public, calm them through credible, honest information, and tell them you're doing everything you can to protect them, definitely. But you owe it to people to do that and try to calm them so that when they hear anything that you say, they will listen and believe you and do what you ask them to do. Now, when the first month of COVID, March 2020, I was alarmed myself because I saw public health officials. I could tell they were doing it. They were actively trying to scare the public.
Right.
They were actively trying to get people and to listen to them, to obey them, to stand 6 feet apart, to wear a mask. You know, but they weren't asking the public to do these things. They were mandating them, and they were trying to alarm the public with a lot of hyperbole. You know, you could die, you could kill your grandmother. And I'm hearing this and I'm thinking, this goes against everything that I've ever learned on crisis work, that you don't, even if it's true, even if it is true that you could spread a disease that could hurt your grandmother, you don't want to start out that way, because the psychology of the masses in my business is you're going to create a panic. And
Right.
you don't want to create a panic. And somebody, I thought, is trying to create a panic. I wouldn't say it's a warfare or whatever. My first suspicions was China, but then I thought, well, what's our own public health officials? Why are they buying into this? And I saw this, and then over the course of the time during the pandemic, I saw many examples where the communication was less than credible by intent. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yes, that's a really good example. Well, first of all, besides having an MD to be a psychiatrist, I have a master's in public health. So I went to school and where I was taught what you were just saying, how to handle a public health crisis. And the answer is you do the exact opposite of what Fauci did. You know, they wanted us, Big Pharma, Fauci, China. I do think that it was a bioweapon, that COVID was a bioweapon that came from China. I mean, we know it came from China, but you know, it's so hard to understand how Americans could do things against America. Like, you know, when you say, why did they buy into it, or why did, you know, I guess money, you know, because Fauci was paying, well, we were paying, taxpayers were paying for this gain of function research in China, where that makes certain bugs, certain, you know, germs, viruses more dangerous, more lethal. And so we were actually involved in cooking our own goose, you know, making the COVID virus more lethal. But anyhow, so what they were doing, and the mandates, what they did was in the news, like all the time, they kept having it like every hour. You know, if you listen like to a radio, even more than that, actually, like a radio station or a television station, they would have it at least once an hour, but really more. How many people died today of COVID? They kept hammering that in. People are dying from COVID. And if you don't do and they paid the hospitals, they paid doctors and hospitals a bonus to give people the COVID, well, first of all, to diagnose them with COVID, and second of all, to give them vaccines when the vaccines were available. So, but the first thing was to scare people to death so that they would do all these things to wear masks and take the vaccines and stay 6 feet apart and all these ridiculous things, because the real message, or what they were really getting at, was trying to get people to feel like they have no control over their environment and that they should just listen to Big Brother. That was the underlying reason, you know, with Bill Gates and the WEF and all of that. That was the real, I mean, of course, Big Pharma making money, that was part of it too, but it was really to get people to feel helpless and to give, and scared, and to give their life up to, you know, to believe what Fauci in this case was saying. And I
have a question for you about that, because and again, I played devil's advocate, because I know what you're saying, but you know, there will be people that will say, well, that's just a conspiracy theory. I can't believe she's saying that. What would you say to those people that would say, you're a little bit on the edge there, that First off, and I know that I know what's come out about Wuhan since, but still, there's never been an official confirmation of the origins of it. So it goes all the way back to that. There's never been official confirmations of a lot of things that people sort of know by common sense. But I want to ask you about that specific thing. You're talking about some basic things, and someone might say, well, that's a conspiracy theory. What would you say to them?
Okay, well, I actually did a lot of research into this because I had a website. I put up a website, pleasefirefauci.com. So I did, a lot of research into it because I had on there, all the reasons why we should fire Fauci, things that he said that were wrong. And I had, so when something would come out that would show, like, for example, there were emails that came out between Fauci and some other people in China, or people who were involved in this whole thing. And so I would put that up there, and I put, I created something called Heal Myself. And each of the letters of Heal Myself stands for something that you should do each day. Like I did a lot of media on this. I did my own media campaign on trying to get people to do these things that would be healthy, that would help their immune system and help protect them against COVID, rather than these masks. I mean, not that I told people not to wear the masks, but I never got the COVID shot, and I'm certainly not going to. I wouldn't let my daughter get it. But there have been things coming out more and more showing that Fauci was not helping us. Let's put it that way. And so how even things talking about Wuhan and all that. And so I had a petition that they could sign, and I had this Heal Myself. Some of that was listening to classical or new age music to calm yourself down. L was for laughter. I can't remember all the things. So S for social support, to be involved with, make sure that you were kept being in connection with other people. So each of these things, and I knew these things from my own training, that these would be things that would help your immune system, improve your immune system.
That's when I think of psychological warfare there is some crossover with your work in terrorism, because they're basically stressful triggers that cause stress on people and psychological harm. What are the telltale signs when you look at psychological warfare? I would. That's probably in the same family in a way as terrorism, because it's designed to have an impact on people's feelings and emotions. But when you look for psychological warfare, what are the telltale signs? Would there be 3 or 4 things you look for that say this may not be organic?
Well, first of all, there has to be an agenda. There has to be somebody or bodies, that want to make things happen on a large scale. It's interesting now that you say it, like there is some similarity. First of all, some people would say that there is psychological warfare trying to make us afraid of terrorists. That's why, like when I was saying with my music video, and why I was concerned that people might shoot me. Besides the terrorists themselves, there are some people who don't want you to believe, don't want anybody to believe that terrorism is bad. As crazy as that sounds, there are, it's just like the people who, the protests where, and Netanyahu brought this up when he was speaking to Congress. There are the gays for Gaza. Gays for Gaza. You remember that? Gays for
Yes.
Gaza are like chickens for KFC. And because Gaza, in Gaza, in the Middle East, anywhere except Israel, you would be thrown off a roof if they knew you were gay or lesbian or LGBTQ plus. So it was so ridiculous. That just showed the insanity. They don't even know. That's the problem. They don't really know what they're talking about, and they just think, these poor Gazans are victims, and we have to be on the side of anybody who's a victim. But now I lost what was it.
Well, the telltale signs.
Right.
I can throw a few by you too. One of them, and I know you've seen this. It's projection. And people say, well, what's projection? Well, and then it's an easy thing to ridicule and take lightly, but I don't. And I'll tell you what projection is. I mean, you know what it is, but I'll just reframe what it is. And that is, projection is when I accuse you of doing something that I'm doing.
Right.
And so if I'm stealing, I'll if I'm working at McDonald's and I'm stealing from the cash register and my coworker's not, and my boss is not stealing, but I am. Well, I know that I'm going to get caught pretty soon, so I'm going to accuse my manager of stealing from the cash register to take the heat off of me.
Yeah.
And what that accomplishes is, first off, it takes the heat off of me. Second of all, and this is the main thing when it's used in a public communication arena, is when someone uses projection, it not only takes the heat off the accuser. If I say, well, look, you guys are doing this, whatever this is, it also kind of shields me from your accusation of what I'm actually doing. So again, if I'm that McDonald's worker stealing, when my manager says I'm the one stealing and I accused him first,
right,
then all of a sudden, when the manager says, well, he was stealing, then whoever you report to says, wait a second, I don't know who to believe now.
Right.
And that's what projection does. But you know this from a psychological standpoint. How would you explain it?
Well, I mean, that's a very good way. So that's kind of a purposeful way of that's projection when one knows when one is projecting. But there's projection that goes on when a person doesn't know that they're doing it. Like, for example, like in relationships, for example, when someone accuses their partner of being lazy or being stingy or being not being affectionate enough, or anything that you could think of, and it's really where you're that way, and you're not purposely calling him that to get the heat off of you, but it's like you don't see it in yourself and you're putting it on somebody else. Then for in psychological warfare, that would be on purpose, that you're calling somebody. I mean, for the most part, it's on purpose that you're saying that someone, some politician or some, I can't think of another example other than right now.
Well, I know it's an easy one to be raising taxes, or causing harm, so that the Republicans will accuse the Democrats of one thing, the Democrats will accuse the Republicans of the other, and depending on who gets there first, oftentimes is what the public thinks.
Yes, or in this past election, it when it came. Well, here's a good example. When Biden was running for president the first time, when he was running from his basement, first of all, that was to hide. They were trying to hide right from the beginning how incompetent he was. But I went on, and this was another one of my campaigns, trying to warn people that he had what I called encroaching dementia. That you should not vote for him because his dementia is encroaching, which it has done, and every year it's going to get worse and worse, which it has done. So they tried to get us to believe that, like by keeping him in the basement, telling us that was so he didn't get COVID, and so that we wouldn't recognize that he had dementia. And of course, then it's come out later. Another example, I don't know if this is psychological warfare really, or you probably would say it's just politics, but as this, when Kamala Harris was running, when they replaced Biden, she didn't have much time to run. And she has what I called an imposter syndrome. She didn't really feel that she was capable of being vice president, which she wasn't. And so she certainly didn't feel that she was capable of being president. So they couldn't talk about the issues because she didn't even know most of the issues, or she certainly didn't have an opinion that she could defend on them. And so, so they started calling Trump all these other things. They were projecting things that that Trump was a danger to America, and even calling him Hitler at one point by the end. He's somebody you have to really watch out for. And they were pretty effective at that. I mean, obviously not effective enough because it was a landslide, but that was something that they were trying to hide. First of all, that she didn't have any opinions about different issues, or any plans for how she would fix different issues. And they were projecting what they really want to do. And I don't know if you agree with me, and it's okay, but what the leftists, at least, not all Democrats, but the extreme leftists are trying to control America, trying to destroy the American family, so that these are old tactics from, you must know, from propaganda, destroy the American family so that the kids can be more easily influenced by their teachers, who are teaching them that they should be trans, or teaching them, critical race theory, to hate people of a different race, which is, kids don't normally hate people or determine whether they like somebody by the color of somebody's skin. It's whether the person is nice to them, whether they're a friend, all kinds of things like that. And critical race theory has just made the kids more conscious of race, and more angry, more afraid of the other race, and more, angry about it. Like, the people who are white, who are being told they're the oppressed. They don't even know what, this is in kindergarten. So, that you want to call it propaganda, psychological warfare. It is. Well, what I was going to say before, when you were saying something about terrorists and the connection to psychological warfare, yes, that's the warfare. Terrorists, the definition is making people terrified of you, so that you can then determine what goes on in that country. But also that's what's happening in these schools, to get kids to believe certain things, to then be. You don't think that with COVID, whether you want to believe it was a biological war weapon, that's one thing. But certainly, I think you would agree that COVID was something that was brought about to make us in America feel less like we have our own agency, less powerful, less individual. All these things that make America great, freedom and individuality and all of that. It was to make us feel like to stay in our little houses until the big bosses tell us when it's okay to come out.
That did scare me. What you just said. It's those of us of a certain age, I guess, the baby boomers or maybe Gen X, we remember. We read 1984 in school. Some of us remember, the Cold War, and we studied it and we understood it. And there were so many common assumptions based on our collective knowledge. It wasn't just one person at a time. We all went to school and we all learned about the threat. We all learned about communism in a certain way. And there were certain things that happened during COVID that you just mentioned that I couldn't believe it was America, really. I couldn't believe that people were being arrested. I can picture a video right now of a woman sitting in a football stadium trying to watch her son play football. And she was sitting by herself, probably 30 feet from anybody. Yet the police came over and they put her in handcuffs and arrested her because she didn't have a mask on. And we saw in LA, we saw, skateboard parks plowed over with sand because they didn't want people to. There were certain things that almost seemed much beyond public health and almost vindictive. And, there was almost this sort of vindictive exercise of power. The governor in Michigan, taped off parts of stores where you were allowed in the store if you wanted to buy alcohol, but you weren't allowed to walk over and buy, seeds for your garden. And it was almost like someone creatively decided we're going to take away the joy out of your life. I don't know. And you would really be able to explain that, because there has to be a psychological reason for that.
Well, to control us more easily, to be more dependent upon Big Brother for everything. California was really bad. They even had, or at least in Los Angeles, but I think it was in all of California, with our wonderful governor, there was something they were encouraging us to report our neighbors. I mean, talk about 1984, if our neighbor wasn't wearing a mask or like store owners, people with businesses, if they weren't keeping the rules for COVID, like not letting people in unless they had masks and just various rules, you were supposed to report them to the government. Of course, we're not over COVID. That has had, it is still having a really bad effect on America. It's really very unfortunate.
I think it is lasting. I was in a store this past week, and I counted. Not that I made a point of counting, but I couldn't avoid. I counted 3 people still wearing masks on a beautiful summer day. And most people obviously are beyond it, but some people are not. I mean, and that just tells you what an impact that's had on society.
Right. And economically also, it's really destroyed a lot of American, businesses and so on. But I meant that what you were saying with the mask, but I meant the part that not only has that continued for some people, and yeah, I see that sometimes, people wearing masks, but I mean that even just the whole idea of being afraid or being, the people have kind of shrunk into themselves, that become more timid, become feeling less able to change things in the world. And that's not good.
No, it's not good. I talked to a teacher recently, a high school teacher, and he told me that that generation, the younger generation and the generation that was in high school, when COVID, they're more dependent on their phones, and like to what you just pretty much reinforcing what you just said, that their interpersonal communication skills are lacking. That's what he said.
Yes. That was 1 or 2 years that kids missed from school. And not only did it hurt them intellectually, but yes, there are certain things that you're supposed to do psychologically, certain periods of growth, that you need to communicate with other kids and play games with other kids, and, certain socialization that you missed when you weren't going to school. And I had said back then, I don't think anybody did it, but I said that the schools should have made all the kids go back a year, not to make only certain kids, because that would be stigmatizing, but to just say, we are going to have this rule that everybody has to repeat whatever grade you were in, and that would have helped. It certainly would have helped intellectually, because people are missing. There are parts of education that people are missing, but also it would have helped, when they did go back to school, it was very stressful when they did come back to school after 1 or 2 years, and they were learning materials that were dependent upon these other 1 or 2 years that they really didn't master. So that added extra stress, and that's part of why kids have had such a hard time.
That is it's something that should be studied for years at every level of society because it was so far reaching. Well, I mentioned in the intro, and this time has been flying by, and there's another whole nother topic area, and we don't have time to get into it in the same length that we just did, but I did want to ask you about it because it's something that Kristen had mentioned that you had given some thought to, and that is the emotional collapse of America's leadership, and that sounds pretty compelling to me. And I'm wondering what your thinking is there when you say there's an emotional collapse of leadership.
Well, in part, I was primarily referring to the Obama-Biden years. Obama, in my opinion, he was the worst president we ever had. And I think some things recently, there's been some things that have come out where he's going to be studied, and he certainly was the most anti-Semitic and pro-terrorist president we've ever had. And when Biden was president, it was really Obama who was pulling the strings or signing with the auto pen, and, as well as other people. And there was a lot, a good example of this is something that just happened. I don't know if you watched the press conference yesterday, Trump's press conference about crime in Washington, D.C.
I read the stories about it and I saw clips, but I did not watch the full press conference.
Well, it was a good press conference, and he said there were more people at that press conference than he had ever known to be at a press conference. And why? Was it because everybody was happy about what he was going to say that he was going to do? No, I think it was because people were, some people, people who don't like Trump were going to jump on this, to say he's taking over Washington, D.C., he's federalizing it. What? Nobody's ever done this before. It was scary to some people. And so the difference, yes, Trump has done a lot in his first, is it 200 days now? I think I read, I don't know exactly.
6 months, 7 months.
It's been at least 7 months. 6-7 months. I was at the inauguration actually. People weren't used to that. There hasn't been that leadership for a long time, or when there was, it was going in the wrong direction. So people got frightened by, what is he doing? He's writing all these executive orders. What is he doing? He's destroying the country. And this was a great example. If you wanted to say that, if you wanted to be convinced that he was this dictator, because that's the whole thing that they're trying to say, that they've been trying to say, he's going to be a dictator. And so now to take over Washington, D.C., in terms of making sure that there's no crime or less crime, trying to have it be less crime, that fed right into their narrative. And so, that's the kind of thing that people we aren't used to having, especially because of the 4 years of Biden. We're not used to having a real leader, and we needed a real leader, and we always need a real leader. And so that is something that, all of a sudden it gets a lot of people, I don't think the majority, but it gets some people nervous, oh, look, he is going to be a dictator after all. Look, he just took over Washington, D.C. And that's another thing that there have been some, I'm sure you saw, there have been some videos. What is his name? O'Keefe is doing, he does these videos. He has people sort of befriend. Recently, what he's been doing is have people befriend some of the people in the government, in the bureaucracy, and it must be really cute women because they get these guys.
They get them to open up.
Yes, to reveal unbelievably stupid things, admitting that things are happening in the government that shouldn't be happening. And so, so that's kind of, I mean, it's great that he does that.
It's really something how that happens. But I think what it does when you see videos like those, and it could be Republican or Democrat too, but it just reminds you that that there seems to be this, this whole George Orwell thing that people bring up. Big Brother is flawless in his dominance and power, but in reality, we see that that people who would have you stay home and not leave your house and not go to church, those people are bureaucrats, and they're flawed, and there's a lot of them, and they make mistakes, and they go to dinner with James O'Keefe or his people, and they make mistakes, and they let certain things come out, and it's the same. To your point, you brought up something about Joe Biden. Again, I'll go back to my experience. There was something that I've handled a lot of press conferences myself, and I've done a lot of these things, and there are just some rules, said and unsaid, and you just aren't mean or rude to the press. You just aren't, and you certainly don't have a press conference and treat the press like they're little children. And what I noticed with Biden while he was still a candidate, and especially while he was a candidate, and as soon as he was done with his prepared remarks,
yes,
they wouldn't want to open it up to Q&A. And what the PR people would do for the campaign was literally scream over the press so that they couldn't ask questions, and so the Biden couldn't hear the question. So they would say things like, "Moving on, time to leave," whatever. It wasn't they weren't aggressively yelling at them, but they were saying it's time to leave so loud and so forcefully and physically ushering the press out like a herd out of the room.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, boy, they're desperate for them not to ask a question.
Yes.
And it goes back to what I said about COVID. It's like, what is going on here? What are they so afraid of? So I think that they were showing certain vulnerabilities in their behaviors, and they knew it. But I guess they figured the trade-off was, well, yes, I know this is against form for public relations, but the worst case would be for one of these questions to get asked and for Biden to actually answer it. And we don't want to risk that.
Right. And to prove your point, remember when he said to that one guy who asked him a question, press, well, I'm not sure if he was press or just someone in the audience, but Biden didn't like his question, and he said something like, "You're a dog-faced pony."
Oh, that
remember
was during the campaign too. Yeah. Yeah, I can picture it. Yeah, he called the guy names, and he just and it surprised me because I talked to my fellow people in my field, and I couldn't believe they couldn't see what I could see. And these are good PR people. They see it when it's their client. They see it when it's other people. I don't know why they couldn't see it here, and they really couldn't.
Yes.
They weren't being dishonest with me. They just were blind. I guess in your world they call that confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance.
Yes, and denial.
Denial, absolutely. But I'm thinking we get paid to see things as they are and analyze them and help our clients through them. And we have to tell our clients things they don't want to hear, and we have to deal with things that we don't want to deal with to make things better.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why so many people haven't been able to see the techniques that they do themselves used on them. And it goes back to one other thing too, and that is you had the press, and they did the exact same thing. The press, you have freedom of speech and the First Amendment, and the press is all for that, but they had no trouble with not letting people go to church, which is part of the First Amendment, and they had no trouble with banning people on social media for opinions that weren't popular. And they had no trouble taking things on face value from the federal government, the FDA and the CDC. And I thought, what happened to the press? They lost whatever it is that they once had.
Yes. That's another thing that COVID did has a long-lasting effect, is not being allowed to go to your place of worship. So people are going much less. And I mean, after COVID, people have gotten into the habit of, they used to do, some places did, my temple did, service by Zoom, when we weren't allowed to come to the synagogue. And other places did that too. And so now people just got sort of lazy, and complacent about, why do I have to go to church or temple, or, and that's another way of dividing the country, like what I was saying before with trying to destroy the nuclear family. This is another way to sort of destroy people and to take away the spirituality of them, whatever religion you are. And so, that has been a lot of damage is being done still by that.
Yeah. That that's true. Well, I just have one more question for you, and it's more future oriented. I know we're beyond the time that we had budgeted for this, but I wanted to ask you this final question, and it's more about you and where we go from here, that kind of thing, because I know that you approve of, and I'm neutral here on this podcast, but a lot of my listeners and a lot of our viewers, are on both sides of the aisle. But you see what Trump is doing today, and we know that Trump is going to be, 2028, there will be a new president and things like that. So you almost have to look at things like a trend line, and you wonder where the country is really going. Is this is what's happening right now the future, or are things from the past going to come back, or is there a different future ahead where it's more like the one you and I remember, where people could be from both parties and they could coexist and get along and do things and agree on some common priorities that people don't seem to agree on anymore?
Yes, I would like it to go back to Norman Rockwell's America. I think that's what Trump believes as well, trying to bring America back to the values that it once had. I have some friends who don't like Trump, but we just talk about other things, and the idea that families have divorces and families, where they don't invite certain people to family dinners, whoever the president is or whatever the politics are, it should not be more important than your love for your relatives or your love for your friends. And you can get around that, and I hope people will. I'm hoping that at the end of 4 years, that America will have changed a lot more back to the America it was, the traditional values and so on. I'm working on something. I've been working for the past several months. It's taking me longer than I thought it would, but I'm trying to do a really good job. I have created a diagnostic classification, Trump derangement syndrome. We hear of Trump derangement syndrome, but I have put it in very detailed psychological terms, like the diagnoses in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And I am going to be submitting it to the American Psychiatric Association for inclusion in the next Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And for a number of reasons. First of all, so that people can get treatment, that it gets recognized as an entity, and so that all the DSM is used for for mental health professionals to talk together and they're on the same page. But it's also used by insurance companies to pay for illnesses or not. And so people if that were a real diagnosis, recognized diagnosis by the APA in the DSM, then some insurance companies might well pay for some of that treatment. And we need, I gave examples. I have examples in the proposal of people with mild, moderate, and severe cases of Trump derangement syndrome. And when I was looking for examples, there are so many examples, they kind of just jump out at you. And there's no way to say that that this isn't a real entity. I mean, it has taken over people's lives. Some people, that's to a greater or lesser degree. So getting, the severe cases, for example, Rosie O'Donnell, who moved to Ireland, people, and in other ways too, as I said, divorces are happening, and there's a lot of problems caused by that, and people are just out of it. Is a quasi I call it a quasi psychotic, an irrational quasi psychotic state. And some people are more psychotic than others, but it's not just something to laugh about. In his first term, the title, the condition was brought up, but it was more like people were kind of laughing at it. Now it is not something to laugh about anymore, because especially with all the attempts of assassination, and with all those that were foiled that we don't even know about, and Iran putting a fatwa out on him. I mean, it's a pretty serious kind of situation.
What do you think the chances are of an insurance company paying for somebody with that?
Well, insurance companies, pay for, they don't want to pay, period. For anything. Supposedly there was supposed to be parity between psychiatric conditions and physical conditions, but it's not happening, and they're not paying for sufficient treatment.
Well, that's an issue for another day.
Another podcast, yes.
Carole Lieberman, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it.
It was very enjoyable. Thank you.
The Shaping Opinion podcast is a production of O'Brien Communications. Copyright O'Brien Communications 2025. Find us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like to watch, go to YouTube, Rumble, or our Substack page, shapingopinion.com.